Welcome to another day, and I'm so thankful for God's mercy and His faithfulness. And we're going to be in 1 Timothy 6 in a couple of minutes. If you'd like to look on the scripture with me, I know some of you, I forget I have a microphone here that needs to be closer. Sorry about that if you couldn't hear. I realize some of you listen to this driving and different things, and you can't look verses up, so I'll always read them to you. But I just wanted to take a moment here. Not long ago, I was able to be a part of my pastor's funeral. And I've had the privilege of really only having two pastors. Dr. Jack Hiles was my pastor during my college years, and then a very close friend during the years that followed as a pastor until he went to heaven. And then Pastor Blue, and here's a picture of the program. I've mentioned it before, but I don't like to forget people. I like to keep people alive, and so there's pictures on my wall. I'm not sure what you would see coming by my office or whatever, but there's a family picture on one side. There's my parents and grandmother on one, and then there's my wife and I in Israel on another wall. But anyway, before I get to Timothy, I just wanted to read a little bit here to you from Pastor Blue's little program that they put out, and just a couple things. Picture this is a farm boy in Mentone, Indiana, born in 1926, and a very poor family, very needy family. At 8 years old, he accepted Christ, and at 15 years old, he surrendered his life to God, to whatever God wanted him to do. He joined the Navy and was at the invasion of Okinawa. After the Navy, he graduated from Biola in Los Angeles. He went to work as an assistant pastor, working with young people at the First Baptist Church of Van Nuys. He was there 11 years. During those 11 years, he started working with each of the high schools in the area and then the colleges in the area, and he established Bible clubs, what we would call them. I can't remember if that's what he called them or not. He and I have talked about it often over the years, but yeah, basically every high school and college in the Van Nuys area or within a near driving distance, he had some kind of ministry on campus. And then, of course, as a very large church, he had a huge ministry. But he had over 1,000 young people he worked with, and just a phenomenal ministry for 11 years. Then he left and went to Redding in Northern California. And in 1962, he started North Valley Baptist Church, and he stayed there as the pastor until 2001 when he retired. And so then since he retired in 2001, he preached and won souls. He still oversaw the radio program, the radio station, not just a program, the whole 24/7 radio station. And he and one other man were basically the board of directors, and then a rescue mission. And he never said much about it, but he was responsible for raising the money. $3 million a year he raised for those two ministries to keep them afloat and reaching people with the gospel. And he was always giving God the credit. God did some unusual things in that rescue mission, the Good News Rescue Mission. He bought a 3-bedroom house, or rented, I can't remember when it started, just a little 3-bedroom place for men on the street that had no home. By the time of his death, there were 389 beds in the facility. As a computer program, lengthy, I want to say 6 months, maybe 9 months, training men for the ministry for a good career, so they could step out and get a job. In 1970, he started KVIP, the Christian radio station, and little by little, it opened up into more and more transmitters, the things that keep it going further and further. And they were in 150 communities in California, Arizona, and then around the world. And of course, it's online. And he hosted the daily radio program called Morning Inspirations. And he did those every morning, every weekday morning for 50 years. And that's pretty amazing. And he did a whole lot of other things. He wrote and traveled and toured, and he had a Bible college. That's where my wife and I first started in a Bible college. And just an amazing man. and had people saved and baptized. He baptized once a month, and at his church, and I think that people were baptized every month. Throughout the whole time. I don't know. During the memorial day, the funeral service, they did have some statistics, and I'm terrible with numbers. If anybody that knows me is aware, but a man who dedicated his life. Now, in the midst of that, victory after victory, and he won souls, and he challenged young people and other pastors for the things of God. In the midst of that, and the church, I'm guessing the church ran close to 3,000 or somewhere right around there when I was going to college there in the late 70s. And the town only had 65 to 70,000 people in Redding. It's still not a big town, but it's right on Interstate 5, kind of a crossroads, so it's got a lot of business, probably more business proportionally than a typical city of 60 to 70,000. But a great ministry. But in the midst of all the blessings, and if I remember right, he had 9 building programs in his first 11 years of his church. And that's just phenomenal. And he said, and I never went to the bank. We raised the money, and if we needed to borrow money, we borrowed it from church members. And he said, and I told him, of course, you're not going to charge the kind of interest the bank would charge because you're doing this for Jesus. And so if there was money needed to be borrowed, it was from the membership. They raised the money, and they'd have a note, a signed note, and they'd get it paid back. And he told me, see, so many times these generous people, they would loan money to the church for something, and then within a few years when it was going to get paid back, they'd just say, you know what, we're doing fine without it, just don't keep it, and they just sign the note off. And many times the generous people of God, the buildings. When he started, there was a small chapel with classrooms. I'm guessing that'd seat a couple of hundred they built. And then there was a 2-story classroom building that was built. And then I'm going to say a 1,500 seat auditorium, maybe bigger, but something like that. And then a 3-story educational and office building. And then there was a ball field. Pastor Blue was a baseball pitcher, and he kept the baseball. That was a big thing. He had a city league. I think their church played in, I know they played in a league. I don't know if it was a church league or a city league, but I went to a couple games, and their vocabulary matched the city league, whether it was church teams or city league. But and not Pastor Blues. He was godly. But sometimes sports brings out the flesh a little bit. But Pastor Blue, he had a lighted baseball field, and then a bus garage, actually a building for their buses, for their bus mechanics, a big, beautiful gym with showers and locker rooms. And then they had a camp with a couple of lakes on the camp property, and actually 2 camps on the one property. And so they could run it like we would run a teen camp on one side and the junior age children's camp at the other side, and share the dining hall and the lakes and things. But then he had the radio station and the rescue mission, and started many, many churches, revived churches around the northern part of the state, churches that had died, and he'd rebirth them, finance new buildings and all. Just a great testimony. But in the midst of all those blessings, he shared on occasion with me a few of the battles. And there are battles, and understand, Paul said, fight the good fight of faith. It is a fight to keep your faith strong. He said, we wrestle not. So we got fighting and wrestling. We wrestle not against flesh and blood in Ephesians 6. We wrestle against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's why we don't want to get bitter at people. They're not our enemy. We've got a spiritual enemy. Now, those people might surrender themselves to be used of the devil, but we wrestle and we fight. And then in Hebrews chapter 12, he talks about, verse 1 and 2, he talks about run the race. That's a race. We're pressured. The Christian life's a battle. Remember, Jesus said to Peter, Satan hath desired to have thee, that he may sift thee as wheat. And so there's a sifting. It's a tough time. This Christian life, we are not on vacation. We're not in retirement. We're deployed soldiers for Jesus Christ. We're ambassadors, but we're at war. He said, no man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life. And we have a battle to fight. And so he told me stories of some battles, some very grievous things. And one thing, I've never seen him when he wasn't a gentleman. wasn't gracious to people that hurt him, and yet he was going to be good to them, and he loved them. And we'd go to I don't know, I guess it's happened, but I'm not sure if I was ever at a restaurant with him. And we ate out on many occasions. I don't know if we ever went to a restaurant when somebody in that restaurant didn't know him. Again, a town of 60,000, he had 3,000 in church, stayed there for 39 years as pastor, and then many years afterwards. And he never forgot a birthday. He sent birthday cards and called on birthdays and anniversaries. And he stayed in touch with people. And so we'd go to a restaurant, somebody would call out his name here. He'd go to a table and talk to people, and he had a memory for people. I'm terrible. I'm terrible at that. But he was a very gifted man. But battles and some burdens. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the evil that goes on in our world, and the root of it. And it's familiar. Most of you know this stuff. But in 1 Timothy 6:6, he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. You know, we have such a foolish world. If I could win the lottery, if someone would give me a bunch of money, if I could have this or that, we think that would be good. But you know what God says? Godliness and contentment, that is great gain. That's great gain. To be godly and to be content with what you have. Look at verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain we can carry nothing out. Having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. There again, you see the word content. And God wants us to be content with what we have. And this discontented world, and I'm not against making your home nice and painting and fixing up, or maybe carpet needs renewed or whatever, or changed, or a new car, and those things happen. But we've got these real popular shows on TV. I don't know what channels they're on, if they're on a special, unique channel, because I don't watch much TV. But the fixer-upper shows, and and junker to mansion shows, and whatever they might be. And I'm not against taking an old beat-up house and making it beautiful, but sometimes you take a house. I walked in and seen some of these before and after. I think, man, that before was pretty nice, and not that the new was not better, but we need to learn contentment. And if God gives you nice things, praise Him for it, enjoy it, and thank Him for it. But having therefore food and raiment, he says in verse 8, let us be therewith content. And then Paul steps over to the other side of this and begins to warn the people of God. Now he's talking to Timothy, a young preacher, about what he should preach on and how he should teach his church. And so in verse 9, he says, they that will be rich. Notice that future tense, will be. Those that will be, those that want to be, those that long to be. They that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and to many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. He says, look at that list. If you will be, those who long to be rich, what happens? Verse 9, they fall into temptation, and there's all kinds of reasons. But if you really want to be rich, sometimes you'll step over a line of right and wrong, because that money or that possession, that thing matters so much to you. A snare is something that catches you. And then he says, unto many foolish and hurtful lust. And lust isn't just a sensuous thing. It's a lust for things, a lust for cars, houses, possessions, a lust for power. And he says you can fall into many foolish and hurtful lusts as you desire to be rich. And then he puts that famous verse 10 of 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, money is not the root of all evil. The love of money, that longing, that passion for it. It's great to have money to buy groceries, to help with a missionary's need. It's great to have finances to support your church or to care for others. Great to have money to feed and clothe your children. That's all good. None of us mind that kind of thing. But this list of evils in verse 9 is huge. And then he says in verse 10, the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after. So when these people coveted after money, and sometime look with your concordance and go through the Bible and follow the word covet, covetous, or covetousness, those three words, and see the black eye that word's got. Covet is a bad thing. It's not just Exodus 20, thou shalt not covet. I mean, covetousness is a bad sin. And it says, which while some coveted after, they've erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And so there's so many sorrows that come because of a covetousness or a love for money or a passion for money. Oh, and I've mentioned it in church, trying to help everybody be careful. When a loved one dies, the vultures come swarming in after, what can I get out of this thing? And Solomon writes in Proverbs 1, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain. There's some ways they do things. It's such a warning. Mark 4:18 and 19. Mark chapter 4, verse 18, 19 says, the seeds in the sower, that the cares of this world choke the word of God and choke the seed of the word of God. So many times the word of God gets into our heart. We hear preaching, we read our Bible, but the cares of this world choke it out, and the word can't grow. Of course, you know the story in Acts 5:5, Ananias and Sapphira, and they lose their lives, not just about money, but because they held back part of the price of the land they'd sold, and they pretended to give all, and they kept some. And it was the lying and deceitfulness what took their lives, but it was the covetousness, the love of money, that caused them to lie and to be deceitful. And we need to be so very careful. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19 says to the judges, it says, if you're going to be, all the way early on in the nation of Israel, there had to be a system of civil order. And so there was ways to handle disputes. Why? Because we're human and we dispute with things. And so he said of judges, you don't take any gifts, because gifts blind the eyes. And it's a very dangerous thing. And that's why, this thing, the love of money, is the root of all evil. One of our boys is out front driving into church, and his school morning, and the sun was shining from the east, and there is a guy just flying up the road behind him, and the young man going to our church was ready to make a left turn, but the guy driving up the road could barely see him because the sun was in his eyes, and he just saw a car, and he just zoomed past it and smashed into this young man, totaled his car. And it was not long, within a matter of days, from my office I could see the street, and that guy, our young man, lost his car. He didn't have it was an older car, and he didn't have insurance to replace it, and I guess he didn't have uninsured motorists. But the other guy, his car wasn't all that bad, and so he kept driving. He didn't have a driver's license, and he didn't have insurance. And now, if that had happened out in the world, there might have been somebody suing over it. But you know what? A guy with no insurance and no driver's license, how do you sue him? He didn't have anything. People want to sue insurance companies because they're invisible. Well, they're not invisible. Everybody that pays rates pays it. And in car accidents, the billboards up and down the freeways, you've been hurt in a motorcycle accident, let me help you. And we're in a corrupt world, and this world of, boy, if I can get something from somebody. And our politicians, Washington, D.C. is bought off. And I'm not saying everybody, but the D.C. as a whole, it is bought and paid for by somebody. And we need to be so very careful. Now, the lesson here is this thing of contentment, to just step back and say, you know what, God's been awful good to me. I've got food, I've got a roof over my head. And in most cases here, we've got a spouse, or we had a spouse for many years, and we can be thankful for the years of a loving family and children. We can thank God we're in America. We can thank God for our church, our Bible. We're so blessed. And you just think about the money we spend on a TV or a phone or cell phones or whatever, and we have a lot to be thankful for. And see, thankfulness is the enemy of covetousness. And just if we would just learn to be grateful, and the love of money is the root of all evil. And in verse 10 of 1 Timothy 6, and contentment is like the founder of generosity, because when we're content, then our things become something for others. And what a sweet personality, what a gracious temperament is that one who's content with what they have. One of our couples in our church had, I won't call their name, most of our church members would know, one of our couples had a water line break in their house. And it was because of poor construction. And but by the time it got stopped and figured out what was wrong, it had ruined the carpet, it had ruined the cabinets, it had ruined a lot of the walls. Water goes up drywall. Oh, a mess. It was such a mess. Well, first thing, get it stopped, and then where do you live? And you can't stand there with moldy walls. And then I'm just off my top of my head. I don't know this. And then you got to figure out, call insurance companies or whatever. And their insurance company said, no, that would be maintenance like changing the oil in your car. This is not like a car accident that's not insured. And that's so wrong. That is just so wrong. And then they were, of course, right now it's hard to get any kind of workers to do any work, because a lot of sorry rascals that are poor excuses for humanity sit home and get a paycheck for doing nothing. Now, if your business pays you from working at home, you can work at home, great, save you a lot of money and gas and wear and tear in your car. But we have people being paid, they're not going to work, they're just collecting a paycheck. That's corrupt, that's wrong. But also, good workers are busy, and so it took a while to get all the work done. I don't know how many weeks it took, but and there was carpet out and cabinets out and then drywall torn down. And of course, the water lines need to be redone. And they had to redo all the water lines, bring them in new because they were broken in the cement. And it's a big mess. And that whole ordeal, I never heard a complaint. I never heard, not the husband or the wife, neither one of them grumbled. And I thought, godliness and contentment is great gain. It's great gain. Win a lottery and you can be ugly and selfish and greedy, and then you're not going to know if you got any friends, because everybody's going to swoop around wanting a chunk of your lottery winnings. But godliness and contentment, that is great gain. I remember many, many years ago, some of you who were in our church long ago would remember Sula Splittick. And Sula was old. I don't even know how old, but I was 25, so she was old. She was, I'm guessing, in her 80s. Sula got going to our church, and she had a car accident. That was when she decided to stop driving. She drifted off the road a little bit and ran into a flatbed trailer that was parked on the side of the road and totaled her car and put her in the hospital. Well, I'm up at the hospital, Loma Linda. There was no local hospitals back in those days. Well, there was this hospital that's now our church, but not many people used it. But she went up to Loma Linda. She broken her neck and whatever other injuries. And Loma Linda serves vegetarian food for one thing, at least back then it did. I assume it still does. And the wings are shaped like a 4-leaf clover or a 3-leaf clover. And so some of the wings, the curves kind of face into each other, and some face into the block wall of the main square structure of the building, and others face outside the other direction. So I go up into Sue's room and ask how she, and she just beaming. She got one of those halos on her head and just beaming. Oh, Pastor, isn't this a beautiful room? What a blessing that I'm in this beautiful room, these nice nurses. And she broke her neck. She's in her 80s and nothing but praise and happy. And asked how she's doing. She said, oh, the food is good. And I thought, I just don't believe that. But I wouldn't accuse her of lying, but she was content. And she said, oh, and look out the window at the view. And I looked out the window, and it was the block wall of the main building. Now she got some sun shining in off that wall, but all contentment. What a godly, content lady. Now she went from there to the Cypress Gardens convalescent home in Riverside. And I began going up. And then I started on Wednesdays, I'd bring some teenagers up with me, pick them up from the school, or maybe it was Saturdays. I forget when it started. But I started bringing some teenagers up there. And I just one time did it. And they sang and visited with Sula, and she was so happy. And the social director, activities director, whoever was, came by and said, do you think you could come by again? I said, well, sure, we can come by again. She said, I'll get the other people together. Your kids sing, and you could have a little church service here. And then it got to be very regular. And Pastor Miller, Brother Miller, down in Pastor Escondido for many years now, he's in heaven. And Brother Miller started taking the teenagers up, and he was a dear friend of Sula. And all of our rest home ministries, all these years, all got started from Sula with a broken neck and her sweet spirit. And you know what? Godliness with contentment is great gain. Now be careful. Obviously, when you're hungry, you want something to eat. When you got to get to work. You don't want the car to break down. And I understand that. But we spent 9.5 years in a tent. There were some frustrating days, but we had a place to meet. God was good. And I have over the years thought, I kind of like a tent. You don't have to worry about the roof, the air conditioning. You don't have to worry about a lot of headaches and problems. When in the evenings you drop the flaps, the cool desert breeze comes through. In the wintertime, you just freeze to death. And summertime, you're just hot as can be. If you've ever gone camping in a tent in the summer when the sun hits it, you get out of that tent. Well, that's how that tent was. But our people were so content, so good. And sometimes I think it'd be fun to start another church, just start all over and put a tent up somewhere. And there's something sweet about a young church, and like a new family. A young couple expecting their first child. They don't know the trouble that kid's going to be, but a blessing to be a part of the family of God and to know God is in charge. I hope you have a great day. Let's labor to have that godliness with contentment. That's great gain.